The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 25. The Old Well House. When Bryce came hurrying up to him, Folliot was standing at his garden door with his hands thrust under his coat-tails, the very picture of a benevolent, leisured gentleman who has nothing to do and is disposed to give his time to anybody. He glanced at Bryce as he had glanced at Glassdale, over the tops of his spectacles, and the glance had no more than a mild inquiry in it. But if Bryce had been less excited, he would have swept a sharp look over the close and ascertained that there was no one about, that Bryce's entrance was unobserved, save for a child or two playing under the tall elms near one of the gates, and for a clerical figure that stalked a path in the far distance. The close was empty of life, and there was no one about either in that part of Folliot's big garden. "I want a bit of talk with you," said Bryce, as Folliot closed the door and turned down a side path to a still more retired region. "Private talk. Let's go where it's quiet." Without replying in words to this suggestion, Folliot led the way through his rose trees to a far corner of his grounds, where an old building of gray stone, covered with ivy, stood amongst the high trees. He turned the key of a doorway and motioned Bryce to enter. "Quiet enough in here, Doctor," he observed. "You've never seen this place. Bit of a fancy of mine." Bryce, absorbed as he was in the thoughts of the moment, glanced curiously at the place into which Folliot had led him. It was a square building of old stone, its walls unlined, unplastered, its floor paved with much worn flags of limestone, evidently set down in a long dead age, and now polished to marble-like smoothness. In its midst, set flush with the floor, was what was evidently a trap-door, furnished with a heavy iron ring. To this Folliot pointed, with a glance of significant interest. "Deepest well in all Wrychester under that," he remarked. "You'd never think it. It's 100 feet deep, and more. Dry now. Water gave out some years ago. Some people would have pulled this old well house down, but not me. I did better. I turned it to good account." He raised a hand and pointed upward to an obviously modern ceiling of strong oak timbers. "Had that put in," he continued, "and turned the top of the building into a little snuggery. Come up." He led the way to a flight of steps in one corner of the lower room, pushed open a door at their head, and showed his companion into a small apartment arranged and furnished in something closely approaching to luxury. The walls were hung with thick fabrics. The carpeting was equally thick. There were pictures, books, and curiosities. The 2 or 3 chairs were deep and big enough to lie down in. The 2 windows commanded pleasant views of the cathedral towers on one side and of the close on the other. "Nice little place to be alone in, do you see?" said Folliot. "Cool in summer, warm in winter. Modern fire grate, you notice. Come here when I want to do a little bit of quiet thinking, what?" "Good place for that, certainly," agreed Bryce. Folliot pointed his visitor to one of the big chairs, and turning to a cabinet, brought out some glasses, a siphon of soda water, and a heavy cut-glass decanter. He nodded at a box of cigars which lay open on a table at Bryce's elbow as he began to mix a couple of drinks. "Help yourself," he said. "Good stuff, those." Not until he had given Bryce a drink, and had carried his own glass to another easy-chair, did Folliot refer to any reason for Bryce's visit. But once settled down, he looked at him speculatively. "What did you want to see me about?" he asked. Bryce, who had lighted a cigar, looked across its smoke at the imperturbable face opposite. "You've just had Glassdale here," he observed quietly. "I saw him leave you." Folliot nodded without any change of expression. "Aye, Doctor," he said. "And what do you know about Glassdale now?" Bryce, who would have cheerfully hobnobbed with a man whom he was about to conduct to the scaffold, lifted his glass and drank. "A good deal," he answered, as he set his glass down. "The fact is, I came here to tell you so. I know a good deal about everything." "A wide term," remarked Folliot. "You've got some limitations to it, I should think. What do you mean by everything?" "I mean about recent matters," replied Bryce. "I've interested myself in them for reasons of my own. Ever since Braden was found at the foot of those stairs in Paradise, and I was fetched to him, I've been interested myself. And I've discovered a great deal more, much more than's known to anybody." Folliot threw one leg over the other and began to jog his foot. "Oh," he said after a pause. "Dear me! And what might you know now, Doctor? Aught you can tell me, eh?" "Lots," answered Bryce. "I came to tell you, on seeing that Glassdale had been with you, because I was with Glassdale this morning." Folliot made no answer, but Bryce saw that his cool, almost indifferent manner was changing. He was beginning, under the surface, to get anxious. "When I left Glassdale at noon," continued Bryce, "I'd no idea, and I don't think he had, that he was coming to see you. But I know what put the notion into his head. I gave him copies of those 2 reward bills. He no doubt thought he might make a bit, and so he came into town, and to you." "Well?" asked Folliot. "I shouldn't wonder," remarked Bryce, reflectively, and almost as if speaking to himself. "I shouldn't at all wonder if Glassdale's the sort of man who can be bought. He no doubt has his price. But all that Glassdale knows is nothing to what I know." Folliot had allowed his cigar to go out. He threw it away, took a fresh one from the box, and slowly struck a match and lighted it. "What might you know now?" he asked after another pause. "I've a bit of faculty for finding things out," answered Bryce boldly, "and I've developed it. I want to know all about Braden, and about who killed him and why. There's only one way of doing all that sort of thing, you know. You've got to go back, a long way back, to the very beginnings. I went back to the time when Braden was married. Not as Braden, of course, but as who he really was, John Brake. That was at a place called Braden Medworth, near Barthorpe, in Leicestershire." He paused there, watching Folliot, but Folliot showed no more than close attention, and Bryce went on. "Not much in that for the really important part of the story," he continued. "But Brake had other associations with Barthorpe. A bit later, he got into close touch with a Barthorpe man who, about the time of Brake's marriage, left Barthorpe and settled in London. Brake and this man began to have some secret dealings together. There was another man in with him, too, a man who was a sort of partner with the Barthorpe man. Brake had evidently a belief in these men, and he trusted them. Unfortunately for himself, he sometimes trusted the bank's money to them. I know what happened. He used to let them have money for short financial transactions to be refunded within a very brief space. But he went to the fire too often and got his fingers burned in the end. The 2 men did him, one of them in particular, and cleared out. He had to stand the racket. He stood it to the tune of 10 years' penal servitude. And, naturally, when he'd finished his time, he wanted to find those 2 men, and began a long search for them. Like to know the names of the men, Mr. Folliot?" "You might mention 'em if you know 'em," answered Folliot. "The name of the particular one was Ray, Faulkner Ray," replied Bryce promptly. "Of the other, the man of lesser importance, Flood." The 2 men looked quietly at each other for a full moment's silence, and it was Bryce who first spoke with a ring of confidence in his tone that showed that he knew he had the whip hand. "Shall I tell you something about Faulkner Ray?" he asked. "I will. It's deeply interesting. Mr. Faulkner Ray, after cheating and deceiving Brake, and leaving him to pay the penalty of his over-trustfulness, cleared out of England and carried his money-making talents to foreign parts. He succeeded in doing well, and he would. And eventually he came back and married a rich widow and settled himself down in an out-of-the-world English town to grow roses. You're Faulkner Ray, you know, Mr. Folliot." Bryce laughed as he made this direct accusation, and sitting forward in his chair, he pointed first to Folliot's face and then to his left hand. Faulkner Ray, he said, had an unfortunate gun accident in his youth, which marked him for life. He lost the middle finger of his left hand, and he got a bad scar on his left jaw. There they are, those marks. Fortunate for you, Mr. Folliot, that the police don't know all that I know, for if they did, those marks would have done for you days ago. For a minute or two Folliot sat jogging his leg, a bad sign in him of rising temper, if Bryce had but known it. While he remained silent he watched Bryce narrowly, and when he spoke his voice was calm as ever. "And what use do you intend to put your knowledge to, if one may ask?" he inquired, half sneeringly. "You said just now that you'd no doubt that man Glassdale could be bought, and I'm inclining to think that you're one of those men that have their price. What is it?" "We've not come to that," retorted Bryce. "You're a bit mistaken. If I have my price, it's not in the same commodity that Glassdale would want. But before we do any talking about that sort of thing, I want to add to my stock of knowledge. Look here, we'll be candid. I don't care a snap of my fingers that Brake or Braden's dead, or that Collishaw's dead, nor if one had his neck broken and the other was poisoned. But whose hand was that which the mason, Varner, saw that morning, when Brake was flung out of that doorway? Come now, whose?" "Not mine, my lad," answered Folliot confidently. "That's a fact." Bryce hesitated, giving Folliot a searching look, and Folliot nodded solemnly. "I tell you, not mine," he repeated. "I'd naught to do with it." "Then who had?" demanded Bryce. "Was it the other man, Flood? And if so, who is Flood?" Folliot got up from his chair, and, cigar between his lips and hands under the tails of his old coat, walked silently about the room for a while. He was evidently thinking deeply, and Bryce made no attempt to disturb him. Some minutes went by before Folliot took the cigar from his lips, and leaning against the chimney-piece, looked fixedly at his visitor. "Look here, my lad," he said earnestly. "You're no doubt, as you say, a good hand at finding things out, and you've doubtless done a good bit of ferreting, and done it well enough in your own opinion. But there's one thing you can't find out, and the police can't find out either, and that's the precise truth about Braden's death. I'd no hand in it. It couldn't be fastened on to me anyhow." Bryce looked up and interjected one word. "Collishaw?" "Nor that either," answered Folliot hastily. "Maybe I know something about both, but neither you nor the police nor anybody could fasten me to either matter. Granting all you say to be true, where's the positive truth?" "What about circumstantial evidence?" asked Bryce. "You'd have a job to get it," retorted Folliot. "Supposing that all you say is true about past matters, nothing can prove, nothing, that I've ever met Braden that morning. On the other hand, I can prove easily that I never did meet him. I can account for every minute of my time that day. As to the other affair, not an ounce of direct evidence." "Then it was the other man," exclaimed Bryce. "Now then, who is he?" Folliot replied with a shrewd glance. "A man who by giving away another man gave himself away would be a damned fool," he answered. "If there is another man—" "As if there must be," interrupted Bryce. "Then he's safe," concluded Folliot. "You'll get nothing from me about him." "And no one can get at you except through him?" asked Bryce. "That's about it," assented Folliot laconically. Bryce laughed cynically. "A pretty coil," he said, with a sneer. "Here, you talked about my price. I'm quite content to hold my tongue if you would tell me something about what happened 17 years ago." "What?" asked Folliot. "You knew Brake. You must have known his family affairs," said Bryce. "What became of Brake's wife and children when he went to prison?" Folliot shook his head, and it was plain to Bryce that his gesture of dissent was genuine. "You're wrong," he answered. "I never at any time knew anything of Brake's family affairs, so little indeed that I never even knew he was married." Bryce rose to his feet and stood staring. "What?" he exclaimed. "You mean to tell me Even now, you don't know that Brake had 2 children, and oh, it's incredible." "What's incredible?" asked Folliot. "What are you talking about?" Bryce, in his eagerness and surprise, grasped Folliot's arm and shook it. "Good heavens, man," he said. "Those 2 wards of Ransford's are Brake's girl and boy. Didn't you know that, didn't you?" "Never," answered Folliot. "Never. And who's Ransford, then?" "I never heard Brake speak of any Ransford. What game is all this? What?" Before Bryce could reply, Folliot suddenly started, thrust his companion aside, and went to one of the windows. A sharp exclamation from him took Bryce to his side. Folliot lifted a shaking hand and pointed into the garden. "There," he whispered. "Hal and what's this mean?" Bryce looked in the direction pointed out. Behind the pergola of rambler roses, the figures of men were coming towards the old well house, led by one of Folliot's gardeners. Suddenly they emerged into full view, and in front of the rest was Mitchington, and close behind him the detective, and behind him Glassdale. End of chapter 25.
The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 26. The Other Man. It was close on 5 o'clock when Glassdale, leaving Folliot at his garden door, turned the corner into the quietness of the precincts. He walked about there for a while, staring at the queer old houses with eyes which saw neither fantastic gables nor twisted chimneys. Glassdale was thinking, and the result of his reflections was that he suddenly exchanged his idle sauntering for brisker steps and walked sharply round to the police station, where he asked to see Mitchington. Mitchington and the detective were just about to walk down to the railway station to meet Ransford, in accordance with his telegram. At the sight of Glassdale, they went back into the inspector's office. Glassdale closed the door and favoured them with a knowing smile. "Something else for you, Inspector," he said. "Mixed up a bit with last night's affair, too. About these mysteries, Braden and Collishaw. I can tell you one man who's in them." "Who, then?" demanded Mitchington. Glassdale went a step nearer to the 2 officials and lowered his voice. "The man who's known here as Stephen Folliot," he answered. "That's a fact." "Nonsense!" exclaimed Mitchington. Then he laughed incredulously. "I can't believe it," he continued. "Mr. Folliot, there must be some mistake." "No mistake," replied Glassdale. "Besides, Folliot's only an assumed name. That man is really one Falkiner Wraye, the man Braden, or Brake, was seeking for many a year. The man who cheated Brake and got him into trouble. I tell you it's a fact. He's admitted it, or as good as done so to me just now." "To you? And let you come away and spread it?" exclaimed Mitchington. "That's incredible. More astonishing than the other." Glassdale laughed. "Ah, but I let him think I could be squared, do you see?" he said. "Hush money, you know. He's under the impression that I'm to go back to him this evening to settle matters. I knew so much, identified him, as a matter of fact, that he'd no option. I tell you he's been at both these affairs, certain. But there's another man." "Who's he?" demanded Mitchington. "Can't say, for I don't know, though I've an idea he'll be a fellow that Brake was also wanting to find," replied Glassdale. "But anyhow, I know what I'm talking about when I tell you of Folliot. You'd better do something before he suspects me." Mitchington glanced at the clock. "Come with us down to the station," he said. "Dr. Ransford's coming in on this express from town. He's got news for us. We'd better hear that first." "Folliot! Good Lord! Who'd have believed or even dreamed it?" "You'll see," said Glassdale as they went out. "Maybe Dr. Ransford's got the same information." Ransford was out of the train as soon as it ran in, and hurried to where Mitchington and his companions were standing, and behind him, to Mitchington's surprise, came old Simpson Harker, who had evidently travelled with him. With a silent gesture, Mitchington beckoned the whole party into an empty waiting-room and closed its door on them. "Now then, Inspector," said Ransford without preface or ceremony, "you've got to act quickly. You got my wire. A few words will explain it. I went up to town this morning, in answer to a message from the bank where Braden lodged his money when he returned to England. To tell you the truth, the managers there and myself have, since Braden's death, been carrying to a conclusion an investigation which I began on Braden's behalf, though he never knew of it, years ago. At the bank I met Mr. Harker here, who had called to find something out for himself. Now, I'll sum things up in a nutshell. For years Braden, or Brake, had been wanting to find two men who cheated him. The name of one is Ray, of the other, Flood. I've been trying to trace them too. At last we've got them. They're in this town, and without doubt the deaths of both Braden and Collishaw are at their door. You know both well enough. Ray is—" "Mr. Folliot," interrupted Mitchington, pointing to Glassdale. "So he's just told us. He's identified him as Ray. But the other, who's he, Doctor?" Ransford glanced at Glassdale as if he wished to question him, but instead he answered Mitchington's question. "The other man," he said, "the man Flood, is also a well-known man to you. Fladgate." Mitchington stared, evidently more astonished than by the first news. "What!" he exclaimed. "The verger! You don't say!" "Do you remember," continued Ransford, "that Folliot got Fladgate his appointment as verger not so very long after he himself came here? He did, anyway, and Fladgate is Flood. We've traced everything through Flood. Ray has been a difficult man to trace, because of his residence abroad for a long time and his change of name, and so on. It was only recently that my agent struck on a line through Flood. But there's the fact, and the probability is that when Braden came here he recognized and was recognized by these two, and that one or the other of them is responsible for his death, and for Collishaw's too. Circumstantial evidence, all of it, no doubt, but irresistible. Now, what do you propose to do?" Mitchington considered matters for a moment. "Fladgate first, certainly," he said. "He lives close by here. We'll go round to his cottage. If he sees he's in a tight place he may let things out. Let's go there at once." He led the whole party out of the station and down the High Street, until they came to a narrow lane of little houses which ran towards the Close. At its entrance a policeman was walking his beat. Mitchington stopped to exchange a few words with him. "This man Fladgate," he said, rejoining the others, "lives alone, 5th cottage down here. He'll be about having his tea. We shall take him by surprise." Presently the group stood around a door at which Mitchington knocked gently, and it was on their grave and watchful faces that a tall, clean-shaven, very solemn-looking man gazed in astonishment as he opened the door, and started back. He went white to the lips, and his hand fell trembling from the latch as Mitchington strode in and the rest crowded behind. "Now then, Fladgate," said Mitchington, going straight to the point and watching his man narrowly, while the detective approached him closely on the other side. "I want you and a word with you at once. Your real name is Flood. What have you to say to that? And it's no use beating about the bush. What have you to say about this Braden affair, and your share with Folliot in it, whose real name is Ray? It's all come out about the two of you. If you've anything to say, you'd better say it." The verger, whose black gown lay thrown across the back of a chair, looked from one face to another with frightened eyes. It was very evident that the suddenness of the descent had completely unnerved him. Ransford's practised eye saw that he was on the verge of a collapse. "Give him time, Mitchington," he said. "Pull yourself together," he added, turning to the man. "Don't be frightened. Answer these questions." "For God's sake, gentlemen," gasped the verger. What is it? What am I to answer? Before God, I'm as innocent as any of you about Mr. Brake's death. Upon my soul and honour I am." "You know all about it," insisted Mitchington. "Come now, isn't it true that you're Flood, and that Folliot's Ray, the two men whose trick on him got Brake convicted years ago? Answer that." Flood looked from one side to the other. He was leaning against his tea-table, set in the middle of his tidy living-room. From the hearth his kettle sent out a pleasant singing that sounded strangely in contrast with the grim situation. "Yes, that's true," he said at last. "But in that affair I wasn't the principal. I was only Ray's agent, as it were. I wasn't responsible. And when Mr. Brake came here, when I met him that morning—" He paused, still looking from one to another of his audience, as if entreating their belief. "As sure as I'm a living man, gentlemen," he suddenly burst out, "I'd no willing hand in Mr. Brake's death. I'll tell you the exact truth. I'll take my oath of it whenever you like. I'd have been thankful to tell many a time, but for Ray. He wouldn't let me at first, and afterwards it got complicated. It was this way. That morning, when Mr. Brake was found dead, I had occasion to go up into that gallery under the clerestory. I suddenly came on him face to face. He recognized me, and I'm telling you the solemn, absolute truth, gentlemen. He'd no sooner recognized me than he attacked me, seizing me by the arm. I hadn't recognized him at first. I did when he laid hold of me. I tried to shake him off, tried to quiet him. He struggled. I don't know what he wanted to do. He began to cry out. It was a wonder he wasn't heard in the church below. And he would have been, only the organ was being played rather loudly. And in the struggle he slipped. It was just by that open doorway, and before I could do more than grasp at him, he shot through the opening and fell. It was sheer, pure accident, gentlemen. Upon my soul, I hadn't the least intention of harming him." "And after that?" asked Mitchington at the end of a brief silence. "I saw Mr. Ray," continued Flood. "Just afterwards, that was. I told him. He bade me keep silent until we saw how things went. Later he forced me to be silent. What could I do? As things were, Ray could have disclaimed me. I shouldn't have had a chance, so I held my tongue." "Now then, Collishaw," demanded Mitchington, "give us the truth about that. Whatever the other was, that was murder." Flood lifted his hand and wiped away the perspiration that had gathered on his face. "Before God, gentlemen," he answered, "I know no more, at least little more about that than you do. I'll tell you all I do know. Ray and I, of course, met now and then and talked about this. It got into our ears at last that Collishaw knew something. My own impression is that he saw what occurred between me and Mr. Brake. He was working somewhere up there. I wanted to speak to Collishaw. Ray wouldn't let me. He bade me leave it to him. A bit later, he told me he'd squared Collishaw with £50. Mitchington and the detective exchanged looks. "Ray, that's Folliot, paid Collishaw £50, did he?" asked the detective. "He told me so," replied Flood, "to hold his tongue. But I'd scarcely heard that when I heard of Collishaw's sudden death. And as to how that happened, or who brought it about, upon my soul, gentlemen, I know nothing. Whatever I may have thought, I never mentioned it to Ray, never. I daren't. You don't know what a man Ray is. I've been under his thumb most of my life, and what are you going to do with me, gentlemen?" Mitchington exchanged a word or two with the detective, and then, putting his head out of the door, beckoned to the policeman, to whom he had spoken at the end of the lane, and who now appeared in company with a fellow constable. He brought both into the cottage. "Get your tea," he said sharply to the verger. "These men will stop with you. You're not to leave this room." He gave some instructions to the two policemen in an undertone, and motioned Ransford and the others to follow him. "It strikes me," he said when they were outside in the narrow lane, "that what we've just heard is somewhere about the truth. And now we'll go on to Folliot's. There's a way to his house round here." Mrs. Folliot was out. Sackville Bonham was still where Bryce had left him, at the golf links, when the pursuers reached Folliot's. A parlour-maid directed them to the garden. A gardener volunteered the suggestion that his master might be in the old well-house, and showed the way. And Folliot and Bryce saw them coming and looked at each other. "Glassdale!" exclaimed Bryce. By heaven, man, he's told on you." Folliot was still staring through the window. He saw Ransford and Harker following the leading figures, and suddenly he turned to Bryce. "You've no hand in this?" he demanded. "I?" exclaimed Bryce. "I never knew till just now." Folliot pointed to the door. "Go down," he said. "Let 'em in. Bid 'em come up. I'll settle with 'em. Go!" Bryce hurried down to the lower apartment. He was filled with excitement, an unusual thing for him, but in the midst of it, as he made for the outer door, it suddenly struck him that all his schemings and plottings were going for nothing. The truth was at hand, and it was not going to benefit him in the slightest degree. He was beaten. But that there was no time for philosophic reflection. Already those outside were beating at the door. He flung it open, and the foremost men started in surprise at the sight of him, but Bryce bent forward to Mitchington, anxious to play a part to the last. "He's upstairs," he whispered. "Up there. He'll bluff it out if he can, but he's just admitted to me." Mitchington thrust Bryce aside almost roughly. "We know all about that," he said. "I shall have a word or two for you later. Come on now." The men crowded up the stairway into Folliot's snuggery, Bryce, wondering at the inspector's words and manner, following closely behind him and the detective and Glassdale, who led the way. Folliot was standing in the middle of the room, one hand behind his back, the other in his pocket, and as the leading three entered the place, he brought his concealed hand sharply round and, presenting a revolver at Glassdale, fired point-blank at him. But it was not Glassdale who fell. He, wary and watching, started aside as he saw Folliot's movement, and the bullet, passing between his arm and body, found its billet in Bryce, who fell, with little more than a groan, shot through the heart. And as he fell, Folliot, scarcely looking at what he had done, drew his other hand from his pocket, slipped something into his mouth, and sat down in the big chair behind him. And within a moment the other men in the room were looking with horrified faces from one dead face to another. End of chapter 26. Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 27. The Guarded Secret. When Bryce had left her, Mary Bewery had gone into the house to await Ransford's return from town. She meant to tell him of all that Bryce had said, and to beg him to take immediate steps to set matters right. Not only that he himself might be cleared of suspicion, but that Bryce's intrigues might be brought to an end. She had some hope that Ransford would bring back satisfactory news. She knew that his hurried visit to London had some connection with these affairs, and she also remembered what he had said on the previous night. And so, controlling her anger at Bryce and her impatience of the whole situation, she waited as patiently as she could until the time drew near when Ransford might be expected to be seen coming across the close. She knew from which direction he would come, and she remained near the dining-room window looking out for him. But 6 o'clock came and she had seen no sign of him. Then, as she was beginning to think that he had missed the afternoon train, she saw him, at the opposite side of the close, talking earnestly to Dick, who presently came towards the house, while Ransford turned back into Folliot's garden. Dick Bewery came in. His sister saw at once that he had just heard news which had had a sobering effect on his usual effervescent spirits. He looked at her as if he wondered exactly how to give her his message. "I saw you with the doctor just now," she said, using the term by which she and her brother always spoke of their guardian. "Why hasn't he come home?" Dick came close to her, touching her arm. "I say," he said, almost whispering, "don't be frightened. The doctor's all right. But there's something awful just happened at Folliot's." "What?" she demanded. "Speak out, Dick. I'm not frightened. What is it?" Dick shook his head, as if he still scarcely realized the full significance of his news. "It's all a licker to me yet," he answered. "I don't understand it. I only know what the doctor told me, to come and tell you. Look here, it's pretty bad. Folliot and Bryce are both dead." In spite of herself, Mary started back as from a great shock, and clutched at the table by which they were standing. "Dead!" she exclaimed. "Why, Bryce was here speaking to me not an hour ago." "Maybe," said Dick, "but he's dead now. The fact is, Folliot shot him with a revolver, killed him on the spot. And then Folliot poisoned himself, took the same stuff, the doctor said, that finished that chap Collishaw, and died instantly. It was in Folliot's old well-house. The doctor was there, and the police." "What does it all mean?" asked Mary. "Don't know, except this," added Dick. "They've found out about those other affairs, the Braden and the Collishaw affairs. Folliot was concerned in them, and who do you think the other was? You'd never guess. That man Fladgate, the verger. Only that isn't his proper name at all. He and Folliot finished Braden and Collishaw anyway. The police have got Fladgate, and Folliot shot Bryce and killed himself just when they were going to take him." "The doctor told you all this?" asked Mary. "Yes," replied Dick. "Just that, and no more. He called me in as I was passing Folliot's door. He's coming over as soon as he can. Whew, I say, won't there be some fine talk in the town? Anyway, things'll be cleared up now. What did Bryce want here?" "Never mind. I can't talk of it now," answered Mary. She was already thinking of how Bryce had stood before her, active and alive, only an hour earlier. She was thinking, too, of her warning to him. "It's all too dreadful, too awful to understand." "Here's the doctor coming now," said Dick, turning to the window. "He'll tell more." Mary looked anxiously at Ransford as he came hastening in. He looked like a man who has just gone through a crisis, and yet she was somehow conscious that there was a certain atmosphere of relief about him, as though some great weight had suddenly been lifted. He closed the door and looked straight at her. "Dick has told you?" he asked. "All that you told me," said Dick. Ransford pulled off his gloves and flung them on the table with something of a gesture of weariness, and at that Mary hastened to speak. "Don't tell any more. Don't say anything until you feel able," she said. "You're tired." "No," answered Ransford. "I'd rather say what I have to say now, just now. I've wanted to tell both of you what all this was, what it meant, everything about it. And until today, until within the last few hours, it was impossible, because I didn't know everything. Now I do. I even know more than I did an hour ago. Let me tell you now, and have done with it. Sit down there, both of you, and listen." He pointed to a sofa near the hearth, and the brother and sister sat down, looking at him wonderingly. Instead of sitting down himself, he leaned against the edge of the table, looking down at them. "I shall have to tell you some sad things," he said diffidently. "The only consolation is that it's all over now, and certain matters are, or can be, cleared, and you'll have no more secrets. Nor shall I. I've had to keep this one jealously guarded for 17 years, and I never thought it could be released as it has been, in this miserable and terrible fashion. But that's done now, and nothing can help it. And now, to make everything plain, just prepare yourselves to hear something that, at first, sounds very trying. The man whom you've heard of as John Braden, who came to his death, by accident as I now firmly believe, there in Paradise, was, in reality, John Brake, your father." Ransford looked at his two listeners anxiously as he told this, but he met no sign of undue surprise or emotion. Dick looked down at his toes with a little frown, as if he were trying to puzzle something out. Mary continued to watch Ransford with steady eyes. "Your father, John Brake," repeated Ransford, breathing more freely now that he had got the worst news out. "I must go back to the beginning to make things clear to you about him and your mother. He was a close friend of mine when we were young men in London, he a bank manager, I just beginning my work. We used to spend our holidays together in Leicestershire. There we met your mother, whose name was Mary Bury. He married her. I was his best man. They went to live in London, and from that time I did not see so much of them, only now and then. During those first years of his married life, Brake made the acquaintance of a man who came from the same part of Leicestershire that we had met your mother in, a man named Falkiner Wraye. I may as well tell you that Falkiner Wraye and Stephen Folliot were one and the same person. Ransford paused, observing that Mary wished to ask a question. "How long have you known that?" she asked. "Not until today," repeated Ransford promptly. "Never had the ghost of a notion of it. If I had only known, but I hadn't. However, to go back, this man Wraye, who appears always to have been a perfect master of plausibility, able to twist people round his little finger, somehow got into close touch with your father about financial matters. Wraye was at that time a sort of financial agent in London, engaging in various doings which, I should imagine, were in the nature of gambles. He was assisted in these by a man who was either a partner with him or a very confidential clerk or agent, one Flood, who is identical with the man you have known lately as Fladgate, the verger. Between them, these two appear to have cajoled or persuaded your father at times to do very foolish and injudicious things which were, to put it briefly and plainly, the lendings of various sums of money as short loans for their transactions. For some time they invariably kept their word to him, and the advances were always repaid promptly. But eventually, when they had borrowed from him a considerable sum, some thousands of pounds, for a deal which was to be carried through within a couple of days, they decamped with the money and completely disappeared, leaving your father to bear the consequences. You may easily understand what followed. The money which Brake had lent them was the bank's money. The bank unexpectedly came down on him for his balance. The whole thing was found out, and he was prosecuted. He had no defence. He was, of course, technically guilty, and he was sent to penal servitude. Ransford had dreaded telling of this, but Mary made no sign, and Dick only rapped out a sharp question. "He hadn't meant to rob the bank for himself, anyway, had he?" he asked. "No, no, not at all," replied Ransford hastily. "It was a bad error of judgment on his part, Dick, but he'd relied on these men, more particularly on Wraye, who'd been the leading spirit. Well, that was your father's sad fate. Now we come to what happened to your mother and yourselves. Just before your father's arrest, when he knew that all was lost and that he was helpless, he sent hurriedly for me and told me everything in your mother's presence. He begged me to get her and you two children right away at once. She was against it, he insisted. I took you all to a quiet place in the country, where your mother assumed her maiden name. There, within a year, she died. She wasn't a strong woman at any time. After that, well, you both know pretty well what has been the run of things since you began to know anything. We'll leave that. It's nothing to do with the story. I want to go back to your father. I saw him after his conviction. When I had satisfied him that you and your mother were safe, he begged me to do my best to find the two men who had ruined him. I began that search at once, but there was not a trace of them. They had disappeared as completely as if they were dead. I used all sorts of means to trace them without effect, and when at last your father's term of imprisonment was over, and I went to see him on his release, I had to tell him that up to that point all my efforts had been useless. I urged him to let the thing drop, and to start life afresh. But he was determined. Find both men, but particularly Wraye, he would. He refused point-blank to even see his children until he had found these men, and had forced them to acknowledge their misdeeds as regards him. For that, of course, would have cleared him to a certain extent. And in spite of everything I could say, he there and then went off abroad in search of them. He had got some clue, faint and indefinite, but still there, as to Wraye's presence in America, and he went after him. From that time until the morning of his death here in Wrychester, I never saw him again." "You did see him that morning?" asked Mary. "I saw him, of course, unexpectedly," answered Ransford. "I had been across the Close. I came back through the south aisle of the cathedral. Just before I left the west porch I saw Brake going up the stairs into the galleries. I knew him at once. He did not see me, and I hurried home much upset. Unfortunately, I think, Bryce came in on me in that state of agitation. I have reason to believe that he began to suspect and to plot from that moment. And immediately on hearing of Brake's death and its circumstances, I was placed in a terrible dilemma. For I had made up my mind never to tell you two of your father's history until I had been able to trace these two men and wring out of them a confession which would have cleared him of all but the technical commission of the crime of which he was convicted. Now I had not the least idea that the two men were close at hand, nor that they had had any hand in his death, and so I kept silent and let him be buried under the name he had taken, John Braden." Ransford paused and looked at his two listeners as if inviting question or comment, but neither spoke, and he went on. "You know what happened after that," he continued. "It soon became evident to me that sinister and secret things were going on. There was the death of the labourer, Collishaw. There were other matters, but even then I had no suspicion of the real truth. The fact is, I began to have some strange suspicions about Bryce and that old man Harker, based upon certain evidence which I got by chance. But all this time I had never ceased my investigations about Wray and Flood, and when the bank manager on whom Brake had called in London was here at the inquest, I privately told him the whole story, and invited his cooperation in a certain line which I was then following. That line suddenly ran up against the man Flood, otherwise Fladgate. It was not until this very week, however, that my agents definitely discovered Fladgate to be Flood, and that, through the investigation about Flood, Folliot was found to be Wray. To-day, in London, where I met old Harker at the bank at which Brake had lodged the money he had brought from Australia, the whole thing was made clear by the last agent of mine who has had the searching in hand. And it shows how men may easily disappear from a certain round of life, and turn up in another years after. When those two men cheated your father out of that money, they disappeared and separated, each no doubt with his share. Flood went off to some obscure place in the north of England. Wray went over to America. He evidently made a fortune there, knocked about the world for a while, changed his name to Folliot, and under that name married a wealthy widow and settled down here in Wrychester to grow roses. How and where he came across Flood again is not exactly clear, but we knew that a few years ago Flood was in London, in very poor circumstances, and the probability is that it was then when the two men met again. What we do know is that Folliot, as an influential man here, got Flood the post which he has held, and that things have resulted as they have. And that's all that I need to tell you at present. There are details, but they're of no importance." Mary remained silent, but Dick got up with his hands in his pockets. "There's one thing I want to know," he said. "Which of those two chaps killed my father? You said it was accident, but was it? I want to know about that. Are you saying it was accident just to let things down a bit? Don't. I want to know the truth." "I believe it was accident," answered Ransford. "I listened most carefully just now to Fladgate's account of what happened. I firmly believe the man was telling the truth. But I haven't the least doubt that Folliot poisoned Collishaw. Not the least. Folliot knew that if the least thing came out about Fladgate, everything would come down about himself." Dick turned away to leave the room. "Well, Folliot's done for," he remarked. "I don't care about him, but I wanted to know for certain about the other." When Dick had gone, and Ransford and Mary were left alone, a deep silence fell on the room. Mary was apparently deep in thought, and Ransford, after a glance at her, turned away and looked out of the window at the sunlit Close, thinking of the tragedy he had just witnessed. And he had become so absorbed in his thoughts of it that he started at feeling a touch on his arm, and looking round saw Mary standing at his side. "I don't want to say anything now," she said, "about what you have just told us. Some of it I had half guessed, some of it I had conjectured. But why didn't you tell me before? It wasn't that you hadn't confidence?" "Confidence!" he exclaimed. "There was only one reason. I wanted to get your father's memory cleared, as far as possible, before ever telling you anything. I've been wanting to tell you. Hadn't you seen that I hated to keep silent?" "Hadn't you seen that I wanted to share all your trouble about it?" she asked. "That was what hurt me, because I couldn't." Ransford drew a long breath and looked at her. Then he put his hands on her shoulders. "Mary," he said, you don't mean to say, be plain, you don't mean to say that you can care for an old fellow like me?" He was holding her away from him, but she suddenly smiled and came closer to him. "You must have been very blind not to have seen that for a long time," she answered. End of chapter 27 and end of the Paradise Mystery.